Uh, Let me know when we have everyone.
Okay, we're waiting for Josephine and Kai Morton Hagen.
Kai will be joining us a little late. He has a speaking engagement right now.
Okay.
So
And Josephine
I see Josephine popped in. Okay. She doesn't have a fancy background yet. So just the regular one. Okay, are we ready to go? Good morning. And this is really sort of our first big meeting for 2021. So thank you all for joining us. And it's really a warm welcome officially now to our three newest board members, Ado, Diane, and Wendy. So welcome. It's great to have you here today. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to welcome now as our new deputy chair, Len Dree. So it's great to have you, Len, on board as deputy chair. So so we really look forward to this meeting. So as I mentioned, that one or two board members are going to have speaking engagements this morning, so they may pop in and out, but we expect a full complement of the board today. Also, I wanted to welcome everyone who's joining us on YouTube. As I said, we stream on the IAASB YouTube channel. It's one of the most popular channels now, I think, on YouTube. It's trending hot. So look forward to more followers on that. And I wanted to welcome our three official observers for the PIOB, Karen Stothers, and then Jim Dowkin, our CAG chair, and Yosh Matsumoto from Japan FSA. So we have an important agenda, slightly different than usual, but I think it's a really important one. For the first couple of hours, we have reserved a conversation on disruptive technologies and their potential impact on audit and assurance, and then really using that as a springboard to discuss what the role of the IAASB should be in preparing or positioning itself for the changes triggered by technology. And then secondly, we're going to revisit a topic that we began in November 2020 on conforming amendments to the quality as a result of the quality management standards passing. And really, we're trying to pass that, approve that to go out for an ED. I think the great majority of comments had already been taken at the last meeting. But as you remember, we got some last minute comments that we just needed to make sure were not significant, and we didn't want to rush the passage of the ED when you had very little time to review them. So that is our plan for today. I also, in dealing with the first topic, I wanted to welcome some guests from Founders Intelligence. They will introduce themselves shortly. They've been great partners in helping us to get up to speed on disruptive technology and what's happening in the audit and assurance sector. For those who are following us and are interested on what 2021 holds for this board, we will be posting an updated work plan for 2021 on the website by the end of this month. So that's coming shortly. I think we're trying to keep, this is a dynamic process, keep people informed of what we're doing and how things are evolving. So let me pause there. Any questions about today's meeting? Okay, none. So let's turn to disruptive technologies. This is an initiative that I've been very active in promoting, and we talk about it in our strategy document as well. My observation is it's really easy to prepare for incremental change because we see it around us. Hello? Did someone? Okay, sorry. We see it around us. We are able to adjust to that. And in general, that leads to incremental change. What we don't know is what may come down the road. And how to prepare for it. But the problem is when disruption occurs, you're often not ready for it. And, my idea was to set aside a particular part of our capacity to start looking much further out beyond the here and now, but 3, 4, 5 years out, and the emerging trends that may disrupt the field, audit and assurance, that we're setting standards for. And maybe our role isn't to incubate that change, but really be prepared for it, understand the limits, understand how we could promote it in such a way that it does improve quality, and also have a base to have discussions with other stakeholders about their role in this process. So that's really what this is about. And well, as we take on this conversation today, I ask everyone to sort of suspend their normal standard setting beliefs and start to think, okay, what if this change took hold and really disrupted the field for which we set standards? And what does that mean for us? And how could we be constructive players in this without creating competitive imbalances or throwing everything out that we've learned? So that's really what today is about. Really get a base knowledge across the board, increasing awareness, and beginning to have a discussion of what the IAASB's roles and how we structure ourselves to adapt to it. Brett has been the staff lead on this, and he and Yvonne have been doing great work preparing for this session. And as you know, we had a roundtable that included internal and external stakeholders with the support of Founders Intelligence. So I'm going to turn it over to Brett to lead the discussion today. I'll jump in, and we're going to do it in we will ultimately have 4 questions and 4 sort of separate pods of discussion. So Brett, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks to all the board members for being here today. It really is a great opportunity for us to think a little bit about what the future might hold. And as Tom mentioned, suspending disbelief. It's easy sometimes to say, look at some of these topics and say, I don't really see the relevance of this one, and I'm not sure about this one. But if we put all of that aside for a moment and consider a world in which those things do happen, then it often illustrates some insights that we can bring to the table on this one. And I would be remiss as an Australian to not mention that, first of all, today is January 26th, still in most parts of the world, and it is actually Australia Day today. So happy Australia Day, everyone. Some couple of hundred years ago, a fleet of 11 ships arrived at Botany Bay today, and they didn't know what they were getting into either. I don't think any of them had actually ever been to the country before. They were kind of stepping off onto uncharted waters, into a land that they'd never seen. So it's a little bit like us today. Hopefully we're a little bit better informed than they are. So we will approach it, I hope, with that same spirit of frontiersmen and getting into things with a degree of energy and enthusiasm. Michelle, if you can just move to the next slide, please. So when we set up this initiative, what we were really focusing was on trying to position the IAASB for opportunities that can come through technology disruption that transforms audit and assurance. And there's really 2 aspects of this. First of all, considering what might happen that's going to affect the IAASB. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the technologies and how they could affect audits more generally. What we were really trying to get at, though, was not the audit aspect. It's what does this mean for us as standard setters? And that's a question that's not getting asked. There's lots of work being done about the future of the accounting profession, future of audit, but the implications of those things for standard setters is a bit of an unknown land for us. The second thing is we were also trying to work out how best to inform ourselves about these things as we go forward. What processes can we put in place? How can we see whether there are opportunities created by this? Opportunities for us to draft standards in new areas, opportunities for us to tighten or loosen standards, opportunities for us to recognize new technology as it comes into play. We also introduced, one of the other goals of this initiative was to demonstrate that the IAASB is a flexible organization. There is a little bit of a challenge sometimes for a standard setter that our gut reaction sometimes is always to go immediately to standard setting. This is explicitly a project that doesn't necessarily lead to standard setting immediately. It's trying to position us so that if we do need to do standard setting in, as Tom mentioned, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, we will have a base to start from. We will have a base of knowledge and experience. We'll have a base of contacts that we can use to explore those opportunities. And the last objective of this initiative was really to make sure that we're seen to be responsive as a global standard setter. The one thing we know is that disruption often comes from outside the established players. And so whilst we are the market leader, really the only truly global standard setter for audit and assurance, there are other players in the market, and we can't assume necessarily that that we will keep our position without us taking actions to make sure that we're moving ahead. I did want to mention a couple of things as we go through this presentation. You'll hear various talk about ideas or actions we could take and things like that. I just want to emphasize that we haven't decided anything. The purpose of this call is really to get your input, so your insight, your ideas, so that we can take all of those away and work out what those appropriate actions should be. So if you, when you see those things, I just say, just approach it with that attitude of, bringing other ideas to the table as much as you can. I do want to mention also that we have a couple of extra people on the call. You'll see Giovanni Donaldson there. Giovanni and his team from Founders Intelligence have been working very closely with us on providing the support for all the work around contacting startups and innovators, collating all that research, bringing together some roundtables. I'll turn briefly to Yvonne, who will spend a little bit of time, and then we'll hear from the Founders people directly. So Yvonne, can you take it away?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brett. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Next slide, please, Michelle. So there's a couple of implications of the initiative. I'd say that the immediate takeaway from the initiative is getting at how technology is and will transform the audit and assurance ecosystem. And that obviously involves looking at how entities use these technologies and as well as how auditors use the technologies. So we'll get into that shortly. And then that in turn prompts us to start thinking about the enablers to these technologies, which in turn turns us to think about what the IAASB can action and of course what others can action. So in terms of implications for the IAASB, there's really two. There's the actions that would be covered in the unknown future and covers things like transformation related to business systems and processes, complete new frontiers in relation to new or unknown topics. So really embracing transformation and doing things totally different from what we know them to be today. And then the second area would be covered within our current strategy. So things that would be covered by, for example, the technology working group, the audit evidence group, the fraud group, and the less complex entities working group. So that's kind of the the implications of what we're trying to get out of this. Michelle, if we could go to the next slide, please. So we started on our journey and we engaged Founders Intelligence, who's going to be talking to us very shortly, to help us do some research on emerging technologies, and they'll speak to that very, very soon. Following the research, we ran 2 whiteboarding sessions to discuss some key takeaways and possible actions with a small group of board members, representatives from the IFAC TAG, PIOB, PCOB. We then, in November, expanded that discussion to a larger stakeholder group via the roundtable session that Brett and Tom mentioned earlier. So Brett, I think at this point we're good to turn to Founders.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. So I'll turn it now over to our Founders colleagues. Very much appreciate all the work they've done on this. They've been great partners to us. So Gio?
Great, thanks Tom, Brett, Yvonne, and the rest of the IAASB team for the invitation to speak today. My name's Giovanni Donaldson. I'm a partner here at Founders Intelligence. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Rob Haynes, also partner at Founders Intelligence, Tobias Sears and Edward Owen, consultants, and together we've been working on this great project over the last few months. For those who don't know us, Founders Intelligence is a boutique growth consultancy. We're based in London, Berlin, and Sao Paulo. Our main focus is to help companies think through growth and innovation challenges. And what makes us unique is our people, our approach, and our access to the Founders Forum, which is an exclusive network of the world's leading entrepreneurs and VCs. We're pleased to work with a number of leading firms, including Unilever, BP, Visa, Shell, and many others, which you can see also further in this presentation. But in particular, it's been great to work with the IAASB team and this project. We've touched on some of the principal objectives of the work that we undertook. In summary, looking at all these new emerging themes and trends that we can see across audit and insurance, and help think beyond those typical planning horizons. So looking really further out, the 2 to 7 years, 7-year plus timeframe. If we go to the next slide, as Yvonne just summarized, we did this in 2 main phases. The first, an innovation landscape, a research phase. We're going out looking at many startups and VCs across the ecosystem, lots of interviews. I'll touch on those again shortly. And then concluded with, in between the number of workshops that we ran, but a roundtable discussion, bringing in those innovation participants and practitioners to really test out some of these ideas and themes and make sure that we could bring the topic to life for those who joined that discussion. If we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the startups that we had identified in that first phase, that innovation landscape. So we researched well over 100 innovators. They covered these 4 main themes, which we'll come back to. But we also took the opportunity to look at all the different types of tools that could also be interesting in the way that the IAASB runs itself, whether that be through communication or collaboration. And you can see some of those startups that were listed there. The next slide touches on some of the people that we interviewed in more detail, covered 3 main constituents. Some of the innovators that we identified through that first phase that we wanted to get a deeper understanding of what they were doing in the space. We also spoke to practitioners, in this case, the audit and assurance companies, and you can see that the main ones there listed, as well as regulators, association, and national standard setters. I'm sure all these names will be familiar to many of you. And they provided a really great insight from their perspective on some of the challenges they saw in this space. If we go to the next slide, we can touch on some of the themes that I mentioned earlier. And in fact, those themes really map themselves across the value chain of audit and insurance as we saw it. And the first there is touching on assessing information and data, which in a manner of speaking for us is actually focused on obtaining information. You can see a number of the sub-themes that touch on that. But principally, we're looking at accessing data sources, standardization of data, ERP mapping, API connectivity, and the like. The second of those, verifying information, fundamentally is around accuracy and completeness. And there, what you're seeing is supported through the advances of AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's really bringing to life the opportunities of looking at unstructured information and using that unstructured information to verify the work that's been undertaken. The third step, protecting information, again, will be very familiar to many of you, maintaining confidentiality being a key point. But there's some really interesting technology that we identified and showcased during the roundtable around homomorphic encryption. And what that really allows for is the ability to analyze encrypted data in a cross-border way, which allows for further analysis and analytical techniques that may not have been able to be used before. And then lastly, the last step, assessing internal controls. And here we're focusing on internal controls and risk and the use of various technologies. One example would be the simulations or agent-based simulation to reflect a real-world corporate environment to identify where the risks could be within a corporate environment. So those cover the 4 main steps through the value chain. We touched on a couple of other relevant trends: regulatory sandboxes, which is probably very familiar to many of you, behavioral motivators. Here we're looking at nudge techniques where specific notifications can help support compliance, for example. They culminated in these unifying themes, which I won't go into detail, as I'm sure they'll come up in the discussion. They really help form the body of the recommendations, or some of the key areas that we think are worthy of further consideration. And then lastly, the tools that I mentioned earlier to support the IAASB. And then lastly, we mapped all of those sub-themes across a 2x2. So if you go to the next slide, this 2x2 helped us understand the various sub-themes across 2 key dimensions. The first, on the y-axis, our assessment, relatively speaking, in relation to how significant the impact would be: relevant, significant, or momentous, and the timeframes that we would see that change occurring within the 2-year timeframe, 2 to 7, or further out than 7 years. And I think what was most fascinating in the roundtable discussion is that a couple of these macro steps and sub-themes that we touched on, where we thought things would happen further out, say in the +7 year timeframe, the participants in those roundtables actually thought they might happen sooner than expected. And I think that's consistent with our general experience, that things actually happen a lot sooner than we anticipate. And so it was a very interesting insight from our work. Those discussions also led to topics around the differences between organizations large and small, the differences between countries, and their position on the innovation or adoption curve. I'm sure these will also be topics that may come up later in the discussion today. But in any case, the whole body of work, I think, in particular the roundtable, helps summarize the recommendations that have been tabled or positioned at least for discussion today. And so we certainly look forward to that discussion. If there's any questions in relation to process, I'd certainly be happy to take those. Otherwise, I'd love to hand it back to Brett, who I think would be taking it on from here in relation to the next question, the next agenda item.
Yeah, thanks, Gio. Yeah, we can take any questions for the founders people in the context of this next question that we're asking. But you know, please don't be afraid to ask them if you have any questions about it. There's a lot of words on those slides, and some of the technologies might be a little bit unfamiliar to you. So, for example, you know, one of the topics that Gio mentioned was homomorphic encryption, which really baffled me. I couldn't even get my head around the words initially, but eventually I came to understand that it's the ability of to encrypt data such that you can perform analysis on it without ever unencrypting it. So, for example, party in company A could allow access to party in company B, and you could perform your you know, for example, an analytical procedure, but you never actually see the underlying data. Now, we're auditors, so we always get hung up on accuracy and completeness. So obviously there's some more steps we'd have to make, but you can immediately see an application there for audit teams that are remote. You know, we have some words like that, you know, if you see something in the slides that you're finding a little bit challenging, you know, feel free to reach out to, you know, to us, and we can get you in touch with the founders team if we need to. But also, you know, you can always ask today. I thought at this point it might just be interesting, you know, there's a number of people who are present either at the roundtables or at some of the whiteboarding sessions we used in advance of those. So for those people, you know, please feel free to come in with your own observations of what you found most interesting about these slides. This slide here, I really found it quite interesting as a way of driving discussion about what things people find most relevant. So for example, for me, I got really attached to the data standardization one, which you'll see in the top right-hand corner of that slide. And it's not so much because we have any role to play in data standardization. You know, our role at best would be minimal. We don't write rules for bookkeeping for entities, and fundamentally it's going to be a bookkeeping question. Having said that, it's a key enabler for auditors to be able to approach a company and then be able to access the data without having to do a whole bunch of cleaning and remediation of the data before they can start their work. So there's an obvious benefit to audit quality of auditors being able to get straight to work with high value stuff. So I'm seeing that as a big thing. That's just me, of course. You may have your own views. So Michelle, if we could just turn to the next slide, please. Sorry. So with that in mind, we've got two questions for you here, and I'm happy to take these together. The first question is, what technology innovation trends do you think are likely to have the greatest impact on audit and assurance? So we're trying to ask you a very open-ended question to see what you yourselves have drawn from the materials that we presented. And also in terms of the areas identified in slide 8, which was, things like, accessing data, verifying data, protecting data, and assessing internal controls, which of those may be most impacted when you look out into the longer term? So Tom, with that, I'll turn it back to you to see if there's any comments or questions.
Yeah, and I would sort of say is reflect on what you're seeing in your environments as well, because some of these trends are already emerging, and the pace of innovation and your views on whether we got it right, and maybe we're being too pessimistic or overly optimistic about some technologies. Chun Wei.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. And first of all, I just want to again welcome our 3 new colleagues. Although Diane and Wendy, we have seen you on screen for many meetings already, but for the first time joining the meeting proper. So looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you. I want to express my kudos to the staff involved, Brad, Yvonne, and of course, founder, Intelligence, and of course, the leadership of Tom and Willie, allowing the board to be proactive rather than reactive in the face of technology disruptions. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in discussion in October and then the roundtable in November to listen to views and experience shared by the different innovators and other stakeholders. It has been eye-opening and very exciting. I think agenda item 1B has done a great job summarizing the key issues and the opportunities discussed at the roundtable. And I agree with almost everything laid out in the paper and found nothing to critique or much to supplement. The 4 broad areas I feel well captured, where you have assessing, verifying, protecting info, and assessing internal control. Audits and our standard setting, I think, have been traditionally focused on the second and the fourth aspects, i.e. the verification of info and assessment of internal control. And in a tech-driven world that necessitates a tech-driven audit, the other 2 areas become a lot more prominent in terms of assessing info, data, and data confidentiality and protection. And I guess the question to us is, do our standards need reinforcement in those areas? Do we need to provide clearer guidance outside of the standards? And it's great to see that we have all these areas being flagged up now. Practitioners have been asking for clearer guidance on what is considered appropriate level of confidence in data quality, in the integrity of data, in the face of developments and innovations like homomorphic encryption, one of the many terms that we encountered at the roundtable that do not really roll off the tongue. But yes, I think we will probably focus a bit more on those aspects going forward. Now, on verifying information, I just want to quickly mention 3 points, which I'm sure is already on the radar of our tech working group, our audit evidence task force. But firstly, on machine learning, and we know that machine learning needs to be fed humongous amount of historical data, and as we all know, COVID-19 situation has thrown a spanner in the works. I'm not an expert in this. I've been told that therefore the availability of comparable industrial information and trends become exceptionally critical, so that the model can adapt and homomorphic encryption is one of the developments that apparently may enable such other confidential competitor information to be made available. So I may be wrong on that. And other aspects that we, I'm sure, are keeping an eye on are explainable AI, which is of course a critical aspect of assurance provider and regulators focus. And the other element I think we have discussed before is the interpretation distinction between correlation and causation. So I'll just make one last point before I stop. One of the key messages that I heard at the discussion and the roundtable, and Giovanni alluded to that in his introductory remarks, was that even though nobody could tell the future with any degree of certainty, the timeline that we see in the 2x2, the matrix, will in reality be quite a bit more compressed. So we may see that we will need to deal with the impact even sooner than expected. And I think that's probably a fair observation. And just one last thing as well, the two-track development, which get emphasized quite a bit in those conversations as well. While you have probably the well-resourced larger firm and of course the nimble smaller firm just running ahead, we cannot forget the other sector, the other part of the industry, and our standard will need to continue to be principle-based, as again highlighted in the paper. So I think that's the important takeaway from my perspective. Thanks, Tom.
There I am. Your picture moves around. So thank you for that. And thanks, Chun-Wei, for already thinking about the so what. Like, if these are the trends, and this section's really about what's happening out there, but really the next three questions are going to be, so what does this mean for us and how we handle it? So I ask people just to hold off on that, on the so what, but react to like what trends we're seeing. That was really good feedback, Chun-Wei. The next, Fernando.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. And thanks, Giovanni, for the presentation. It's good to remind ourselves some of the discussions we had in November, and welcome also to the three board members. I think it's really difficult to argue that these four themes are the critical ones. Specifically, I think the accessing to information and verifying the information are very critical for the audit practice, because that's the basis for really having all the data that we can use later in the process. I've seen many teams across different firms and different countries struggling with this piece, and I believe this is where we really need to focus our attention in the short term. It doesn't really matter how good the firm is using the technology. Sometimes the challenge is just to really get the data to make sure it's complete, it's accurate. You get all the information that you are requesting. Becomes sometimes really a waste of time for us in the practice. I see inefficiencies in this part of the process when we use technology, and also see benefits once we manage to obtain the data. So my point of view personally is that I think we should focus our attention here and see the implications for us in a daily basis, and what could we do really to help practice around the world, recognizing again that the involvement of technology in different firms, it's at various levels, and also in different countries, it's at various levels. But definitely, whatever we want to use after that, it's a little bit less relevant at this point. If we don't have the right data, doesn't really matter how good the tools are. They are not going to work. Those are my general comments, and congratulations for the good presentation. Thanks.
I even went onto the second screen now. And I wish I need to pin myself on this. Diane, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. I first of all, I want to reach out to everybody and say thank you very much for the opportunity to serve on the board. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. This is a really important topic. And so I want to also thank Brett and Founders Intelligence for bringing this forward. It's a challenging topic, as you can tell. And if I reflect on the questions that you've asked here, when I look at the slide we were just looking at, which had the different quadrants, I think some of the items that are actually in the next gen area will move a little quickly. And I think those are around the subjects of artificial intelligence. And in particular, when we think about artificial intelligence and using that for some of our risk assessments. There's a couple examples in here talking about how they could be using AI for detecting external threats, maybe looking at sentiment. I think those could play into the auditor's assessment as you think about your engagements, your clients, and your overall risk assessment. I think the timeline, I think it will move quicker than 7 years, some of these technologies and some of these applications that auditors could use. I would also agree with Fernando. I think it's really interesting. We get sometimes very focused on the use of the data, but we fail to step back and say, is the data complete? And so I know, Tom, you don't want to get into kind of what does this mean, but I do think that completeness of the data extraction, making sure it's accurate and complete before we then apply some of these techniques is going to be mission critical. So those are my comments on this subject. Thanks, Tom.
So that's the difference. That's a good point. I don't want to say that we shouldn't talk about that. Actually relates to the trends. In fact, there's a really interesting question that data scientists once said to me is completeness may not be a necessary prerequisite to having pretty good models in this space. In fact, models will improve and you can improve completeness over time. How complete do you need to be? It's really, and how good does it need to be better than what we have today? And to some extent, maybe our founders team could talk a little bit, maybe come back to that point later. But sometimes when I was speaking to data scientists is that the misnomer is that people wait to the absolute complete set of data, and you probably don't need that to have a pretty good predictive model.
And Tom, I think you're right. I just would make one comment. I think you're exactly right. It all comes down to the body of evidence.
Right.
And if you know your parameters, that you're working with data that may not be 100% complete, but it still provides some valuable insight, you may decide I'm going to mush ahead with that, but I'm going to supplement that with some other types of evidence. So I think it's a really important point that the board may need to consider the application of that to the field.
Right. And then thinking about our next step is where doesn't our standards adequately contemplate this world in terms of the existence literature? And is there anything inhibiting that type of approach or potentially missing something or not referring to something? And that's sort of the discussion we want to begin generating in the next part of today's debate and out into the future. So thank you for that. Sachika?
Hello, everybody. I also say thank you very much for taking this initiative, Tom. I think this is very, very important for us to be sustainable in the future. And I really enjoy talking with Edward from Founders Intelligence. It was very exciting moment for me. So thank you very much. With regard to the slide, I also have one point that is a data standardization platform for enabling data access that will be now uploaded over 7 years. But I think it may be come earlier than over 7 years, for example, like 5 years. And then that will, actually impact on practitioner can use that in, data analytics in very near future. And also other point is about 4 areas as Fernando said, I also think this is very difficult to choose which one is the greatest impact. But in my mind, assessing internal control may be very critical in the longer term, because I think various technology that will be introduced within 7 years will be applied in innovating business process, such as by introduction of robotic process automation, which will significantly impact on how the auditor will assess internal control beyond 7 years. And also, I'd like to mention 2 things that are not necessarily directly related to the question, but for the sake of this open mind discussion today, if I may. One is that although the paper, I think, does not specifically mention about it, I wonder perhaps in the longer term future, there will also be a big impact on audit and assurance arising from disruptive technologies introduced in financial reporting. What I mean is that in the future, disruptive technology may change how information will be delivered to users. For example, rather than in the format of the structured report, the users may obtain raw data directly so that they can analyze it in a flexible manner. I know it may only become true in far future way, but if it becomes true, I think it will significantly change how the auditor conducts the audit. So I therefore think it will be beneficial to monitor what type of technologies will be in the financial reporting side as well. And the third one is that it's very different point, but implication of the technology innovation on the audit fee. Currently, I think audit fee is basically quoted based on audit time. But if the technology evolves and advanced AI data analysis or real-time audit will be introduced, I think audit time may not necessarily represent the amount of work and resources that the audit firm performs. Because of the technology, the auditors do not need to spend time than before, which may create an undue pressure from client to reduce the level of fee into inappropriate level or create an obstacle for the firm to invest their resources in innovation. I know the issue of audit fee does not directly relate to the IAASB mandate, but for the sake of this open mind discussion today, I'd like to mention it. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, Sachika. Sue Allman.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for the team for the material and the opportunity to I think take some time back and reflect on what is a really important area. I think for me, certainly recognised a lot of the areas that are pulled out in the presentation, and I think, like a couple of others, the data capture is the one that I think in the short to medium term is influencing the opportunity to make progress in some of the other areas. Even the areas where at the moment we have most kind of human intervention in areas like judgment, judgmental areas or looking at completeness, there's probably an opportunity to build more in the way of automation if we can access the data. So I think the things like the common data model, I think probably will enable progress. And I think Brett used the term enabler. And it's interesting to reflect on things like the introduction of XBRL. And I think in Europe, we're now coming into the ESCF program that will provide more consistency, that will then allow more consistency of packages to be able to access data from the auditors. Another point was there were a few references to small firms and conscious of that. I just wanted to reflect that I've had the privilege to be a judge on some accounting awards at various times. And some of the innovation that's come out of the small firms is actually really incredible, particularly ones where they're looking at cross services. So preparing things like tax returns, bookkeeping and so on. Some of the client portals and those kind of things are very impressive, and I wonder whether there are areas there that we could perhaps explore, but it perhaps plays into this this commonality of the data model. Finally, on the graphs, a couple of other areas I thought were that are more current that there probably is more opportunity in the short term is around things like OCR and actually using some of the open banking tools that there are available. And then in the longer term, I think I agree with Sachiko around internal controls. That is the area that there probably is more longer term opportunity. It may not be for this question, but maybe a later one. I think a consideration for the IAASB is around IT general controls, because as the existing sort of box, if you like, becomes more complex, the questions around what happens if IT general controls are not effective becomes more important. But I thought there was some fantastic material in the papers and the outreach about the opportunities to use simulations and other tools to be able to address that. And then the final point was on the 7-year period, the cross-border data protection, I think, is a real issue in terms of being able to achieve some of what we might be able to. So the opportunities that were presented by a couple of things, I think, could be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Josephine.
And thank you, Tom. I also want to say my thanks for such an excellent presentation. I had the privilege of seeing some of this before as part of the technology working group, and it really is a fantastic piece of work. So thank you to all. And of course, I would like to welcome our new members. It will be fabulous working with you in the next few years. Really difficult because I think everything's been said already, but I did want to say that in our consultation on technology and audit quality at the FRC, we heard from almost every respondent that access to high quality data in a consistent and reliable format, of course, would perhaps be the most transformative technological advantage. And that's echoing, of course, what others have said before me. Sue in particular mentioned this, and Fernando. The other point that wasn't necessarily raised in the response to our consultation in this area, but I would agree with, was Sachiko and Sue's point about internal controls. I think this is something that we really do need to focus on, particularly Sue's point about when we're thinking about the auditors' work in this area and general controls. The timeline, I agree with others that it's probably a little bit more flexible depending on the jurisdiction in this particular area, but of course, widespread standardization, CDNs, etc., will help a great deal. I would also suggest that distributed ledger technology will also be transformative, again, perhaps on a shorter timescale than suggested in the paper. And I really don't have anything other to add than those points because others have already raised those. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. Roger.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome to the new members, and thank you very much. It's a great way to start. It's a disruptive year, and to start with the disruptive technologies is a good start. It's great to have some white space to be able to talk about this, because I do see that there is a great benefit. Look, I'm probably reinforcing others. I think that we spend a lot of time in standard setting on the verification, and I do see that probably the area, I think Josephine just used the word transformative, I agree, is accessing increasing levels and types of data and getting ideas on the completeness and reliability of that type of data. I do see as extremely beneficial. Again, I think that the environment that we're in has supercharged a lot of these timeframes, and I see a lot of things coming forward, including data standardization, obviously in different environments, is coming forward much quicker than what we have expected. The only other point to add to what people are saying, I do think there is room here for new assurance services, and I think that we should be considering the types of, where will people want confidence, and what type of assurance services will they want? So it would be good to be thinking about that. So it'll be a little bit of the what if, and we can explore that a little bit later. But agreed with all the points to date, and I do think accessing data is probably the one where I could see that getting the major benefit from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Isabel?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for the presentation and for the choice of the topic. It is very relevant and to the point, and I believe we do have we do need to have this ability at the IAASB to anticipate the future, and even if in some instances it's a very near future. So I agree with many. Some of the topics that have been mentioned are already there. Some will be there quite soon. One among them is artificial intelligence. When decisions are taken on behalf of the auditor, and when you add to this some machine learning, and then it raises a lot of very relevant questions, such as to what extent can we delegate part of professional judgment to a machine? And that's the kind of questions that we're raising now every day. I believe, by the way, that ISBA has also a task force working on technology or innovation, or maybe a mix of the two. And it's also raising some ethical issues, and that's something really interesting to work on. Another topic which is also mentioned, and it's really one of the common matters of concerns nowadays, it's remote auditing. What needs to be done physically, what needs to be done in person, what can be done using a tool on distance. That's definitively something on which we could think further. I also noticed that some of the innovations that are mentioned in the slides may be used in all audits, while some other may have an interest only in specific situations. For example, I was thinking at data anonymization. I think it would be very useful, for example, when you have to access health data in the audit of an hospital. And sometimes it's very challenging to get that data because it's confidential. But if you can get it anonymized, then you can work on that data and it's not an issue anymore. My last point is to announce that in a few minutes I will have to join a speaking commitment for CNCC. And so now Fabien will take the floor and raise his hand on behalf of me for the next 1 hour. And I will be back with you for the second point on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Good luck with your presentation. Ida.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And may I start to express my thankfulness to be able to serve on the board, and also express my thanks to the staff and the folks of Founders Intelligence of a good and insightful presentation. I think a lot of things have been said, but I do want to emphasize a couple of things, and that's that I recognize a lot of the technologies, that a lot of it is talked about, and I agree with pretty much most of the people that have spoken so far, is that I see a much more accelerated time schedule. I also think that there's a number of technologies that are primarily sitting at the client side. So this is technologies that the entities are implementing. And I wonder if it's useful to think of it as technologies that impact the entities that we audit and technologies that impact the audit firms. And clearly there's a cross relationship, because if technology is developed or used within the entities, maybe in respect of their internal controls, how can the auditor then effectively utilize that, and what technology will he or she use for that? And as such, I think, my emphasis would be next to, and I think John Lee already said that, and Sashiko and Sue as well, is more towards the verifying information, assessing internal controls as to relevant for standard setting. No doubt, protecting information and access to information is important. It's practical. It will, or it has practical issues at the moment, but this will resolve itself. and I already see much earlier developments than potentially anticipated in one of the slides. The other thing, and that was also raised by Sashiko and Sue, is the digital reporting. We have IAASB heading our way in Europe. In the Netherlands, there is already a standard reporting or business reporting language that requires separate assurance. And that's something that I also wanted to emphasize. Well, with new technology, that allows for different type of financial reporting, and how are we going to provide assurance with it? Is that going to be part of the digital file itself, or will it be a report outside of it? Well, this is where technology can also progress, and that where there's opportunities. Similarly, other services, well, assurance, can we provide assurance on machine learning, artificial intelligence? It is being thought about at the moment. I think I see a large role for the assessing internal control, and particularly when technology is implemented and technology of the nature that utilizes artificial intelligence, you need to be there at the front end to assess whether that technology will actually be able to do what it's intending to do, and how does the company and the auditor of that company keep track of whether it still does what it needs to do. And then as and when companies implement technology, it needs to be firmly embedded in the internal control system at the front end, because this is very hard to repair backwards. So I think I will stop there. Yeah, some other topics we'll discuss later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edu. Taiwe. Ty, I accidentally muted you. I try to take your hand down.
Sorry. Okay. Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon from Germany, and hello, colleagues, and a warm welcome also to the new colleagues. I'm very happy to work with you over the next years, and many thanks to the presentation team. This is a really good presentation. I'm very close to what colleagues have mentioned so far. When I have seen this first question the first time, where it stands, what technology innovation trends are likely, then I had three trends in mind. One is very often mentioned, is artificial intelligence, which is currently based on machine learning and expert systems. So as I know from the practice, second trend, which I see is more relevant for the practitioners, is robotic process automation. I think we should discuss about it. So for example, I know from one of the big four players in Germany that they use between 60,000 and 100,000 software bots for auditing. So this is a really important trend. We should consider this innovation trend. And the last trend, which is very often discussed in the literature, which is not currently so important, but maybe in the future, is the blockchain technology. And the second part of the question is where we see the greatest impact on audit and assurance. And I'm also very close to the colleagues which have mentioned that the greatest impact will likely to be the trend to accessing information or data from the entity or other sources. And I also see that the other matters are also very important, but they result from this trend. The second part of the question, where we asked which trend we see, or for the time horizon 7+, this is a very, very, very important question. So when we do research at university in this area, we never ask the experts for the trends in 7+ year, because I know the answer. The answer is I do not know what happens in 7+ years. So we normally ask when we look in the future a time horizon, let me say within 3 years, because mostly 5 or more years. It's very difficult for experts to see in the future what happened in 7+. Maybe in 7+ years we will have the blockchain technology established, and the experts say we do not need any auditors because blockchain helps us to interact within the financial accounting between several firms. So there's no need for any auditors in this field. So my answer is I think it's very difficult to see what will happen in a time horizon 7+. That's all. Thanks again.
Thank you. Let's see. Next, we have Julie.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to everyone, and welcome to the new board members. I guess one of the advantages or disadvantages of going later in the list is that a lot of my fellow board members have already made a number of the comments that I had. So maybe I'll just add a couple things. And I was intrigued by the paper, and maybe when I was thinking about the trends and the quadrant and the timeline, a number of the items I think we're already seeing in the audit and assurance space. So I think about artificial intelligence for detecting external threats and risks, things around scenario building for internal controls or data standardization. So Brett, I would agree with you. That's a big one. I almost think there's different parts to it. I think there's you scratch the surface maybe in the near term, and then it matures over time so that it becomes a little bit more mature and more built in and more standardized as you go down the sort of timeline. So not to complicate the graph, but I almost think that some of the things that are in the longer term quadrant almost live a little bit earlier in the timeline as people start to use them a little bit and they start to mature, and maybe the versions we're using today will look pretty archaic 7 years from now, but I think that there are things that are happening in those spaces. So I would say, those are sort of the 3 that I thought about, and 3 that I'm seeing, sort of living and starting to work in our audits today. And then I guess stepping back on what would have the biggest impact to audit and assurance, I think there's going to be sort of 2 components to that. There's the things that as auditors we can do differently, or maybe that for efficiency purposes is better, or for effectiveness purposes it's better, or it just might be, the inability to do it the old way going forward. So those would be things I think from an auditor perspective I'd need to think about. And then I think, and maybe it ties a little bit to Sachko's point around the financial reporting piece, I think there will be things from a client or management perspective that are being done differently, and auditors will need to respond to that. So it might be that we're forced as auditors to do things differently because the financial reporting is being done differently, or some of these technologies are being used at our clients. And if they're being used at our clients, we need to be thinking about how to respond to that. That might drive new risks with respect to fraud. That might drive new risks just overall in the audit. So I was thinking about it from those 2 perspectives. And I think that's it, Tom.
Thank you, Julie. Eric?
Thank you, Tom, and also want to welcome the new members to the board. And what a great topic to have your first discussion in the board meeting. And I also want to thank Tom and the team for doing this work. I think it's a very challenging thing to do, given the rapidity of change, but also very necessary to keep a proactive and forward-looking perspective as audit evolves. My comments will probably resonate with some of the other members. I think for me, the immediate greatest impact is around the access to information and data, and how that evolves will change how auditors can perform their audits. The more information they're able to have access to, the better, and the more challenges that may bring to some of our standard setting. I believe similar to what Roger was saying, I think data reliability is going to be an important point. And I think that's not just from an audit perspective. I think it's, and maybe this touches onto the financial reporting side, is I think users are going to use data directly into their own systems from the clients that they're making decisions about. So for example, if it's an investor, they will be able to drill down into a company's data. And so I think there's going to be a lot of concerns about data standards, data governance, data reliability. And I think that's something that's connected to technology, and therefore an important area for us to be aware of. As we think about the audit, it will not necessarily be on sort of periodic financial reporting, but it might just be data sets that companies are creating through their own systems. So I just wanted to bring that out. I think that's all I'll say at this point. Thank you.
Thanks. We have three more comments. Brett, I guess my fear of silence as we got to this question has been put to bed a little bit. This is really great conversation. Kai?
Thank you. Sorry for coming late into the meeting. I was presenting to the Forum of Firms on giving an update on the less complex entities project. So, and welcome to the board members, new board members. Also, thanks to the staff and the work that's been done on technology. I think this is great work, and it's touching on some of the issues that we're currently struggling with. I think most of my comments are covered already, but what I would just like to add is that I think there are quite the jurisdictional differences on this area are quite big. I think it's both in the data standardization and the availability of standardized data at the entities, but also on what kind of tools and systems are available to do some of this work. And I think, as Ido said, they may have already some reporting that are being discussed in other jurisdictions, and how to include that. Also on some of what Roger and Eric also touched on, new ways of assurance, as information may be available to users not only through the financial reporting, but that they will be given data sets, and we need to consider how to provide assurance on that. So also then maybe developing different new ways of assurance services would be something looking into. But looking into what I see in practice today, I see a lot of great work is being done. But what the auditor is generally struggling with is what the analysis and the work I do with the technology, how does that transform into audit evidence, and which audit procedures that I traditionally do can I now take out? So that's one of the pain points as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Kai. Lynn?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the new members. I wanted to take a slightly different tack. I think it's important to look at where we've got technology innovation, but also to look at what the current challenges are and not actually forgetting those. And I sit on a number of boards and audit committees, and the issues that are causing us grief at present are around privacy and security. And I don't see those going away anytime soon. And I think they will have and continue to have a significant impact on audit and assurance. So I think that remembering that technology sits within legislative frameworks, both nationally and internationally, is an important aspect to be aware of, and making sure that we maintain a close eye and consideration on the current issues that beset the industry and the organisations that use technology. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Lynn. Really good perspective there. Wendy?
I am grateful for the privilege of serving on this board, and I appreciate the warm welcome. I will be brief because the benefit of being very last is that most of my points have been expressed. I think that in preparing for this very first meeting, I really enjoyed reading the materials. I'm supportive of the work. Thank you to the staff and to founders. I will just add 2 brief points or solidify the points that have been made. One size does not fit all, so that is on the firm size, but also to a point that was made earlier on the client side. So I like this presentation where the way that the quadrants overlap and the way that the circles can move. It reminds me of a science of an amoeba a little bit, so that we can adjust it, and we must adjust it to stay balanced and continue to consider the impact and relevance, whether that's on us, but particularly on our clients. And from a smaller firm perspective, you know, we've gotten very excited about technology and gone out to our clients who have just rapidly held up a stop sign. So I think I need to re-say that point, and then I go back to one of the earliest speakers about which area will have the greatest impact on audit and assurance. And to me, it's the data access and the reliability. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Great. So that, I think we pretty much heard from everyone on this topic. And a couple of things I heard is, one, I think there's general agreement that we've identified thematically the right themes, though obviously, which I think is maybe one of the goals of this, is that we develop a common language for us to have a base of moving forward. So that really is comforting to me. Secondly, I've heard is, if anything, and we were quite conservative on the timelines. I remember putting this presentation together because we didn't want people to say, oh, you're crazy, that's pie in the sky stuff, that's never going to happen. So, but if anything, we heard these trends are going to hit you faster, and that we need, it sort of gave me comfort that we were right to put this on the agenda, but also that we need to be prepared to maybe move more quickly than we even recognize. So that's something I took away. Obviously, a lot on data and the importance of data, reliability, completeness, access to it, and all subsequent questions about assurance, other assurance services that are associated with it. I hear a lot on lots of people pointing us to, with data, what's the role of a common data model? And to me, that raises questions of the likelihood of that emerging, how it will emerge, and our role in it. That's another question to follow. You know, assessing data and verifying information. Verifying information, assessing internal controls appeared a number of times. in the discussions, as well as sort of the leading trends to focus on. I thought Lynn's point, and others have raised it, but this is why we have people who come from the preparer background too, or take on that role, is like really look at what's happening inside companies where the innovation really is taking hold, which will have knock-on effects. So I think that's something, as we think about how to stay up to speed on things, as a reliable source for that information, we need to think about it. And that really will come into maybe our next question in some ways. So that was a great conversation. I turn it back to Brett and Yvonne and Gio and team, if you have any other reactions, if there are other themes that I've missed in my summary.
Thanks, Tom. No, I think your summary is right on the money. I was trying to keep a little tally of who mentioned or how many mentions there were of each of the individual themes, and it came out pretty balanced, except for the accessing information one, which seemed to be a bit of a theme for many people. Just a couple of things that I heard that I thought were quite interesting that may be a little bit different to what we've heard before. One was Sue Armand made, I thought, a very interesting comment about SMEs. And, sort of we do tend to sometimes sort of take this, let's not go too fast. We don't want to, put ourselves in a position where the SME market is disrupted because we've moved too quickly. And I thought, Sue, you made an excellent observation about, don't also ignore the fact that they have some ability to move forward quite quickly sometimes. There is a benefit to the size as well. And also, a comment Ido made about, perhaps next time you see a presentation like this, we do need to split it up a little bit in terms of entity technologies versus auditor technologies, because there are some of them that are, theoretically the auditor could do it, but realistically it's a client-side issue. And if the client deploys, for example, simulations and, to simulate their internal control policies, that can be theoretically done by the auditor, but practically might be a little bit challenging. Whereas if the clients are doing it, then it's much easier for the auditor to say, okay, well, this is a really interesting insight into what you're doing. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next slide, Michelle. But thanks everyone very much for those comments. It really has, I think, set us up well for the rest of this discussion today. I'll turn to Willie now just to help connect the conversation we just had with the next couple of questions that we have. Willie.
Thank you, Brett, and hello everyone, and thank you for a very good first part of the discussion. So I think what you've seen in the issues papers, as well as the first part of the discussion we've just had, is we've heard a lot about emerging technologies, technology trends, possibilities of disruption, etc. And when we were doing this work together with Founders Intelligence, the obvious question that comes up at some stage is, so what? What does it mean for the IAASB? And this is really what we want to focus on in the second part of the discussion, where we ask, how do we connect what we've heard to our thinking about the way forward? And I think we need to realize that, and Tom alluded to this earlier as well, that is obviously a lot of uncertainties. There's obviously a lot of things that are unknown and that we need to keep an open mind. I also think that we need to realize that as the IAASB, not everything is in our power. We can't be everything to everyone. We need to be clear in terms of what we can do as the global standard setter within our remit. So when we start thinking about possible action items, start sharing some ideas about things to consider, we also like to put it, and you saw that in the issues paper, into the bucket of what is probably the things that are for the IAASB and what are things that might be for others to take forward. And obviously we can play a role in that. Whatever we decide in terms of these things obviously needs to be in touch with our strategy in terms of our strategic objectives. But we are at the point where we need to start to share some ideas. And you've seen some of that in the issues paper in agenda item 1B, where we've tried to, at the end of looking at the research as well as the roundtable feedback, we sort of reflected on the way forward and how we can think in terms of taking the technology's impact on these four broad areas within the audit and assurance value chain that we've seen during the first discussion: accessing information, verifying information, protecting information, and understanding and evaluating internal controls over information, and thinking that the impact in those areas will lead to innovations in audit and assurance, like, for example, continuous and real-time auditing, like, for example, analytics-based auditing, like remote audit and assurance, and as well as a broader theme in terms of a technology-enabled profession. And once you start thinking about the impact in those areas can lead to these types of innovations, then you get to ask yourself the question, so what does this mean in terms of the areas in which we need to take certain actions, or think about our actions, and start sharing possible or think about possible considerations. And that's really what the next three questions are going to focus on, in terms of, so how do we stay on top of this topic? Because a large part of the work that we started last year when we engaged Founders Intelligence was that we simply said to ourselves, we didn't know where we were. So we wanted to confirm, what do we know? What should we have known by this time? So where are we on the spectrum of technology and understanding technology and its impact on audit assurance? And now that we've got a very good starting point, how do we stay on top of it? How do we stay connected to the topic, to the stakeholders, to the relevant role players? Then we also want to reflect a little bit on what does this mean for our work plan? What does this mean in terms of looking at, we have a current body of standards, we have ongoing and open projects and work streams, and we've got obviously future work plan decisions that we need to take. And how do we start thinking about that? I think in one of the comments in the first part of the discussion, we referred to the technology working group. How do we look at that? Do we look at a reconstituted, redefined technology working group with a different mandate? How do we keep on focusing on maybe immediate needs for non-authoritative guidance? And then obviously the more fundamental work plan decisions in terms of possible standard setting activities. And then lastly, also, how do we think in terms of more strategic considerations across our strategic objectives, but also especially looking inward in terms of our ways of working? What does this mean for our processes and procedures, our staff, our board members? And that's really how we want to sort of transition from the first part of the discussion to this part of the discussion, where we start to share ideas about possible action items. So that is just a brief introduction. I'll hand it back to Brett, and then we'll go through the questions individually. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Willie. Michelle, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the next question that we have for you, this is really starting to get down into some ideas that we've been considering for how to take this forward, how to start to position the IAASB. So as we mentioned at the very start, these aren't set in stone. There's no action plans attached to these at the moment. We're very much looking for your input and ideas and your own reflections on what these things mean for you. So the question's on the right-hand side. I'm not going to read it out, but what I will do is just talk a little bit about, some of the things we've already identified as possibilities for maintaining awareness of future trends. So this is really, how do we make sure, after we've put all this effort into getting ourselves to this point where, with the assistance of Founders Intelligence, how do we make sure we don't lose it again? How do we make sure we're staying close to the market, close to innovation, close to the innovators, so that we don't get caught by surprise? So some of the items that we've talked about here, one is the idea of having regular technology and innovation roundtables. And by regular, I don't mean monthly or anything like that. We're thinking more like once a year, maybe once every 2 years. I get a little nervous if it gets 2 years, because then I start thinking, geez, things move very quickly. And one of the learnings from the first part of this session is, a number of you have reflected that things are moving very quickly and perhaps quicker than we came to. But so that was one thing and that would really be an opportunity to bring together people from different parts of the industry, both startups, established players, innovation partners within the firms. We had some great conversations with them as part of the research. So that would be an opportunity to bring some of those people together and make sure that we're staying appropriately close to the market, also appropriately close to user needs. What are users looking for when we talk about this brave new world? The second item that we thought about here was an inventory of technology trends and potentially disruptive technology. So this would be more in the nature of documents so that we could keep track of things in a more formal way. This would be a really good tool for us to be able to access as we needed it. It would be the sort of thing that task forces, working group staff could refer to as they needed to. So that if you did have a question, for example, on, okay, we're hitting up against this particular problem, we know there's technology in the area, at least we can, therefore have a stepping off point for starting that discussion. We'd know who to contact, we'd know who the key players are. The third point we had here was that formally including this in the IAASB outreach. Now, that's not to say that it hasn't already been done and done quite well. What we're talking about here really is actually making a point of going out to speak to people who otherwise we may have, focused a little bit differently on. So explicitly bringing up innovation and disruptive technology in the context of some of our conversations. For example, with regulatory organisations, IFIA or IOSCO particularly, as a really good starting point to see, how are they approaching these trends. But also, there's an opportunity for us to do some outreach for directly to innovators. But that, of course, may also be covered by some of the roundtable work. The last one I had on this one was just remaining alert to the needs of SMPs in less developed regions. So bearing in mind the observations from the previous session, but we are, as a global standard setter, we need to be conscious that our standards are used in 130 countries and by entities of all shapes and sizes, and they're used in audits of all shapes and sizes. Down to, trust account audits and, all the way up to audits of very large globally significant entities. And we need to recognize that there's a lot of variation within there. There are, there's some of the people we've spoken to, within different jurisdictions will say, look, I'm a partner at a Big Four firm and I'm telling you, we can't do any of this because our clients are just not ready. They don't have the tools, they don't have the data, they don't have the systems. And of course, they can all get it off the shelf, but it's just not there at that stage in their development. And that doesn't mean they won't get there quite quickly. We've heard from other people who said, you know what, we skipped an entire stage. We didn't even bother with stages 1 and 2 because it was more economically efficient for us just to jump to stage 3. So we do need to be aware of those trends and making sure that we're staying very close to those places as well as the top end of town. So I'll pause here, Tom, and turn it back to you for some observations and ideas from board members.
Thank you. So really, this is how do we maintain a scouting function and being on top and being connected, considering our limited resources and the global nature of it. So some ideas are welcome. Lynn?
I think we do need to keep obviously on top of this and make it somehow regular, not ad hoc, because if you don't make it regular, it does fall away very quickly. Therefore, somebody needs to be responsible and accountable for it. And it looks like Brett's put his hand up for that. A couple of ideas that quite appeal to me is having some kind of advisory group or experts panel or something so that there are regular meetings to keep up with it and that the board is then informed about that. And also looking through the material, there's a lot that can be built into current projects. Fraud's mentioned regularly, so's evidence. So making sure that those task forces actively consider technology and build it in, I think could be another valuable tool, as well as the ones that are on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And when you're thinking about sort of an advisory group, one of the things I think about is having a small group of non-traditional players to some extent being the ones advising you, not our normal contacts. I think one of the strategies we deployed my previous life where I ran an innovation function is to have sort of the disruptors meet and sort of push push you to think differently. So you keep it to a small group that convenes a couple times a year at most. And they're the ones who are going to give you the information and force you to think differently. Is that sort of what you have in mind?
Yeah, the people that are going to challenge us and think forward. So people that think outside the box, not within the box, is the kind of people I was thinking about when I ran a big IT function. The person, the innovator who does the lines for the America's Cup, he thinks outside the box, and he was incredibly valuable about taking his technology and thinking about it in our context, and in ways we would have never thought of in a million years. So it's that kind of person, not the people we normally consult with, the regulators or the firms or anything. It's those sharp-end innovators I was thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. It's very similar to the way we thought previously, and it's almost the guests that we invited to our disruption roundtables, or would be the types of people you would invite to join this. Fernando.
Thanks, Tom. Very much in favor of what Lynn mentioned. Actually, after the discussion that we had a few minutes ago, and listening to all the board members, it's pretty clear that technology, it's an issue. It's something that we need to face today. It's something that we need to tackle. We need to be aware of the implications of technology in today's work, in 1 year's work, and probably 5 years' work. And no doubt that eventually we will need people with different skills, probably more knowledgeable in terms of technology. But I think that one of the key aspects of maintaining the inventory is really to differentiate the technology used by the clients or the companies and the technology used by the auditors. And this is a point that was actually emphasized a couple of times in the previous discussions, because I believe that we really want to understand probably in more detail what is really the auditor using today, and how is that really affecting the process of the audit in terms of efficiencies and effectiveness in gathering information, in assessing risk, et cetera, and challenges. And that's probably where we need to pay more attention. I'm not saying that technology used by clients is not relevant. Of course, it plays a role eventually, because we need to understand what they're doing and see if we can leverage from there. But essentially, what the firms are using, I think, is really the most critical part to understand, at least at this point. Many firms are developing new ways of technology. They're moving either faster or slower in terms of using data, in using different trends of technology. And maybe part of this analysis that was made doesn't really take us there. We know there's something outside, but I don't believe at this point we have more details to really understand pros and cons. And for the technology working group, all sources of information are going to be very important, because there's a chance to understand what the group needs to do, and then think about how that interacts with the strategy and the plan, and also how to have certain communication with other task forces, and see if there's a chance to assist or help in however the projects are being developed. And once we have that understanding, probably we will have a better way of deciding the way forward. Very much in favor of having these discussions often, and probably, as Brett said, once a year, it's good. Especially because the updates to the technology probably could change from 1 year to the next one. And it's good to be on top of everything, to really decide upfront what we need to do, and how that plays in the whole process of the strategic plan, resources, timing, and deliverables for practice. Thanks.
Thank you. Len.
Thank you, Tom. This is the first time speaking, so I'm going to extend my welcome to the 3 board members. So I had the benefit of participating in a roundtable. So just share with you my experience. When I went to a roundtable, I was probably in a very close-minded, typical standard setting mode. But 5 minutes into the roundtable, I was a little bit overwhelmed and become very, I guess, motivated to hear more. So when I came out of the roundtable, I was thinking, wow, there's so much we can do. So I came up with a laundry list of things maybe we can think about. But after a few days, you think about the reality. I think we're going through a monitoring group reform and the resources. So my idea is very much aligned with what Lynn and Fernanda really talk about. But one of the things I thought perhaps is in the near term, in terms of awareness, is we don't have to take all this on our own shoulder. I think when we think about not just the audit profession, the overall accounting profession, I think that other people might be also making inroads in terms of looking at technology, also might impacting the future of profession. So for example, I know AICPA and others might have similar projects, so maybe we can partner with them. And another thing I thought, just for this question number 2, is when I was participating in the roundtable, there were some amazing presentations. For example, the innovation part, idea part, is telling me that, oh my God, this is what future would look like or help us to accomplish. But I think for us, in terms of the awareness thing, is also following up on whether they can deliver those innovation, those ideas. Because I hear about, for example, behavior analytics for internal control, looking at people's behavior to detect fraud. It's great if the technology can do that, but are they being delivered at the moment? I know a lot of several companies we talked to at the roundtable, they are in the developing stage. So probably for us a part of awareness type of activity is to follow up on those companies. Have they delivered? Are there real cases? Are there data which we can actually go back and learn from their experiences? Also, the people are using those tools, whether that accomplished the objective they have presented to us at the roundtable. So at least for question 2, those are some of the things we can do without investing a lot of time. And I'll save the other comments for questions 3 and 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Josephine.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I mean, I agree absolutely with the comments made by my fellow board members before me. To Lynn's point in particular, building ideas to current projects, I think that's really important. In fact, I think if we do any outreach on any project that's doesn't have technology in its strapline, we should always have some questions around technology. And make sure we build in what we understand in terms of technology and how that might impact the current project, and feed that information to our participants and then ask them to comment accordingly. I think that's a very, very good idea going forward, and it's easy to plug that in. I think there's some demystification needed for maybe more board members. Maybe I'm probably talking about myself here than others, but I do think that we do need some specific training and development for us, particularly in understanding some of the core issues, but combined with external expertise, perhaps some way in what I understand how the roundtable was led is in a manner similar to that. So as an example, at the FRC, we're undertaking some specific technology training to facilitate our work in developing guidance and looking at our standards. But we're also working with experts such as the Alan Turing Institute, where we've realized they have very specialist skills that we can draw on around specific uses of technology, but also around things like AI governance, as an example. I would think that it's still important to foster links with the academic community. Kai might have a comment on that. It might be that some research doesn't initially appear to be directly applicable to audit, but on digging into it, and we've done some of this as well, and understanding the direction channel, it can be apparent or become apparent how technologies might impact an audit in the future. So include those in our experts, as it were. I think it's important to understand what third-party providers of technology are offering to audit firms. I want to also piggyback off Sue's comments, sorry Sue, about the fact that where SMEs are being more innovative than perhaps we had initially understood, we should understand, as Sue very rightly points out, what they are doing in this area. But there are a lot of third-party providers, and then there are firms who are developing their own technology. As I said, we used to have presentations at the IAASB from some firms on some of their technological advancements, and would like to hear from EY, and particularly in that area of AI and ML that was mentioned earlier. So agree with others, but just some other points to think about. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Josephine. One of the things too is we, on the point about task forces and working groups and consultations as it relates to technology, the accountability actually will reside a little bit on the task forces and working groups to make sure that it's front and center and the staff that manages it. So that's a good prompt on that topic. Diane.
Yes. So first of all, I continue to think this is a very important topic that should stay on the agenda, and I get a little anxious about taking our foot off the pedal a bit, because I think it's possible that these innovative technologies will really continue to change. Rapid change could happen over 6 months. And so I do think we need to think about what our touch points are so that too much time doesn't go by and we have to start over. A thought might be to create some sort of center of excellence, or it's not a great name, but a knowledge steward, somebody who owns this agenda, or a group of small people who own this agenda on behalf of the board. And we can think about how that's staffed or how that comes together and who is on that. I think some of the folks that Lynn mentioned would be great folks to contribute to that center of excellence. And then what I see is this really working in a two-pronged approach. You've got a center of excellence very focused on this topic. That center of excellence nudges the projects that are underway and says, have you thought about technology? Conversely, as I think it was Josephine mentioned it, as these projects are moving forward, there should be kind of a set in stone pause to think, how is technology going to affect this standard? And I think that two-pronged approach will be really important. At the end of the day, the conclusion might be there is no role for technology in this project. But I just would think that we'd want to build in those safeguards so that the project doesn't go too far. We haven't thought about the role of technology and then have to take some steps backwards. So I think that two-pronged approach could work quite nicely. And that's it, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm just going to echo basically what we've heard so far. I would agree on the inclusion of technology or a nudge, as Diane mentions it, to each project. I think that'll be important, that it's almost a requirement for each task force to at least think about it. And maybe this advisory group or center of excellence or whatever we end up calling it is a resource for those task forces to reach out to. I know at the firms, sometimes when we really want to think outside the box and get new ideas, we go to those that haven't sort of spent a lot of time in an area because they don't have the boundaries, they don't have the experience that's driving them in one direction. They think, broader. So for instance, we have a young professionals group because they just don't have years and years of audit experience. They think differently. They also are very much more likely to adopt technology than maybe some of our older auditors are. So I really agree with that advisory group that Lynn mentioned. I think having people there that aren't sort of bound by requirements or standards or rules or policies is really important, and maybe even bringing in some brand new auditors to the group might be helpful too, because I think they just think differently than we do. They've been brought up in a world where technology is just there and they don't have to think about it as an extra step. So I guess agreeing with everything that's been said, I also agree with making sure this is a regular topic. So I don't know, Brett, if that's annually or twice a year, but I don't think going beyond an annual cycle is going to be a good thing, because I think things are just changing too rapidly. And I would also just add my support behind Josephine's statement about keeping the board sort of educated on this. I think it's important that when we're talking about these topics and also thinking about them at our task force meetings, we know what we're talking about and we have a common understanding of what these technologies are, so we can start to think about how to incorporate them into our work. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Ada?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Well, I think a lot has been said, and I'm not going to re-emphasize that. I also think that it's important that we stay current on the matters and the technology as it progresses. If I try and step back, it makes me wonder whether it is worthwhile to rethink the various initiatives we have around technology and how we can maybe rethink how that will incorporate the forward-looking agenda, maybe even in a way being the center of excellence, bringing outside consultants or specialists in, as Lynn suggested, because we have a technology working group. We have, I believe there's a project advisory panel that helps them. So to what extent can we rethink composition, role, and bringing it to the board every so often as we see fit. So that's a suggestion that clearly I'm just new on the board, so I don't know exactly what they do, how they do it. And the other thing I was thinking about is that in respect of technologies, IFAC must have a similar topic on its agenda, and that will be broader than just the audit function of it. So is there a sense of collaborating with them on this particular topic? Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Chun-Wei?
Thank you, Tom. And I agree with everything that's been said, including all the proposal by the staff. Keeping close to expert, having technology working group as the interface between the expert and turning those into actionable stuff for each of the project. I think all of those make sense. I wanted to come in very quickly to add on to the IAASB outreach point, but I think Edo just sort of make that point as well. It's about amplifying the messages. I know we do a tremendous amount of outreach. IFAC as well, I think they perhaps also talk to a slightly different group of people, and they can broadcast the messages through their PAO's network. So we, through this process, collect a lot of very useful and helpful information. And I think we can share those with them for that. And part of it is inspired by a piece of work that I'm currently undertaking as part of my day job with IFAC. It's a study on Gen Z. And we concluded a global survey. And one of the findings, just to give everyone a preview, is about where they want to start their career. And I remember myself, starting in this profession more than 20 years ago. Audit is almost a de facto starting point, because this is where you get to learn a lot of things and so on. And in that Gen Z study, we see that a very small proportion of Gen Z actually want to go into audit at all. So this is probably not within our mandate per se as a standard setter, but I think it's about the sustainability of the profession. What we're going to set the standard, what we're going to set the standards for in the future. And I think all this different interesting conversation just speak to how attractive this profession could potentially be. I think it's a lot more interesting than, I guess, the stuffy image that the younger people may have. So just in terms of broadcasting those messages, I think working with IFAC and other partners will be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, we are approaching time here, so we're only, and recognize we're only a couple of questions in, but if you're repeating, if you're in agreement with what's been said, please just say that, and it's not that we don't value your comments, but if you have something to add, just focus on the additive element of it. After we're done with question 2, we'll also pause for a break, and we'll allocate more time. I don't think conforming amendments will require all the time that we've allocated. Okay, Sue.
Thanks. So agree with a lot of what's been said. I think about the regularity of the high level thinking. I would sort of suggest at least once a year. A year's a long time in technology. A couple of other points. I have a slightly different perspective to Fernando about the kind of technology that I think it's important we understand, because a lot of the technological developments in firms are responding to developments in the entities that are being audited. So I think it's important that we have the visibility in the wider technological piece as well as in the firms. And probably like others, I had wondered whether there's opportunity for collaboration. There are other standard setters such as IAASB or IAASB who are in a similar kind of space and probably have similar needs, and whether there's an opportunity to leverage off the resource there, and similar to others with IFAC. Thanks.
Thank you. Hold on a second. I think Karen.
Thanks very much, and Happy New Year to everyone, and it's lovely to see everyone well. And I just wanted to emphasize from the PIOB that we are so grateful that you're having this conversation and you're putting the time towards the implications of technology. We too see that in the many areas that we are involved in, and of course each of us personally are involved in technology in our own way. So thank you very much, and thank you all of you for all the comments and your engagement. The one thing I wanted to say, Tom, was I agree with the comment about continuing to have a strong presence in keeping up to date, aware, and the comment that things move much faster than we can even imagine. So I'm very grateful that the board is engaged in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Gio.
Great. I just thought I'd quickly share some perspectives, not only from the work that we did together as a team, but also just from our general experience. You know, certainly there are a number of companies that look to external boards, advisory boards, to support them and bring in that outside thinking into the organization. So certainly, if that was something that you were focused on, that I think it is a great step. And I think just one of the hallmarks of the IAASB, in fact, just the fact that we're on a YouTube channel right now, I think it's also sharing those insights back into the community, which I think was touched on earlier. I think that can be an important step. So not only bringing the participants together, but just sharing those learnings across the ecosystem. The other, building on that, is thinking about, I think it was touched on, centers of excellence, but basically, how do you build accountability within the team and across the board? Just how do we hold ourselves to account that these things will be done, will be followed up, will be looked into, and just have a think about what are some of the tools that could be used to do that, whether it's an individual or a set of individuals. The other is, through the conversations that we had, you could definitely sense across various participants, whether it's the practitioners or the innovators, there wasn't always a lot of dialogue across them. So you could sense that there's definitely the potential to do cross-working working groups, cross-functional working groups to help focus on some of the topics, one of which was accessing data. It seems hot on everyone's mind, and you could see a whole set of activity just in and around that alone, and making sure that standardization as a topic could be reviewed, etc. Whether that's the IAASB's place or not, obviously that's to be determined, but you could definitely see that potential. But what I would add is that you guys do have the convening power. The IAASB has helped us bring these people together. It has helped us achieve the work that we achieved in relation to the innovation landscape and bringing the participants together for the roundtable and other discussions that we've had. So you do have that ability to bring people together, and that shouldn't be overlooked. That was all I was going to say, Tom.
Thank you. Wendy, and then James, and then we'll wrap this section up.
Thanks, Tom. I'll be very brief. I agree with the sentiments. I have strong support. I just want to reiterate what Len said about inclusion and diversity in thinking of the reach out contributors at the roundtables, and making sure we include the test drivers and the people with the provoking thoughts. We often come up with tools and we say these are great tools, and then we forget to test drive them with the users, whether it's the client or the members of our teams. And then I have an observation. There's a difference between technology as we've explored it to this date and what I got out of the presentation for disruptive technology. And that's what we need to stay fluid on. That's what continues to change. Technology is here. That's not, it's been here for years, but it's the disruptive part that really is what I think we have to focus on and may have to continue to refocus. And it could be quarterly because we do have our other strategic plan items, which to me include fraud, going concern, and LCE, which will impact where we spend our time and our resources. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. James?
Thank you. My only point, and first of all, Wendy took my point. I do think the diversification between today's issues and tomorrow's potentials is quite important to bifurcate. My thought, in addition to all of the very good comments, is just being careful we don't create a bottleneck at the international level. And I would encourage leveraging, replicating, getting the multiplier effect by using our national standard setters to mimic and recreate the thoughts that we have at this top level, just to leverage our ability. The reason I say that is I expect once we have awareness, there will be desire for deep dives to see what it means. And I think if we can leverage other groups and national standard setters, we will be more effective in more areas with more substance for our exploratory work. So just referencing our national standard setters liaison. Thank you.
Okay, this has been great. I sort of see a few themes occurring, and let me try to repeat them back. And like, this is guidance for us as we consider next steps. Is somehow we have to build ownership on the topic within our staff and the board. This goes to my general rule of thumb that a distributed accountability model really could really be no accountability. So we need to form some accountability from an expertise standpoint and putting this front and center on the board on a regular basis. That there should be regular touch points on this for the board. And I think James's last warning is the right one, is that the tendency will be to go into the here and now. We need to keep on focusing on the disruptive element as well. If you're not dedicated to it, you'll miss it. So when you have accountability, then you could push it into inclusion in every project. And we should include that in every project and at least have an eye to it. And then finally, getting external perspectives remains a very important idea. And having some type of advisory body, advisory group sounds so formal, it could come in a number of forms, but to be considered, and I don't want to pigeonhole us into any outcome, but all this sort of gives us a good spot to think about. What do we bring to the board? How do we allocate our resources and our time to this topic? Clearly, we need some external support in this in terms of getting perspective. Clearly, we need to dedicate time on the board agenda more regularly to this topic. And clearly, we need to have dedicated resources within our body that has accountability for keeping these issues front and center and keeping us informed. So those were my takeaways from this topic. Brett, do you have anything else you want to add before I lead us into the break?
Look, knowing I'm standing between everyone and the break, I'll keep this very brief. Basically, fully agree with Tom's summary of the issues. The one thing I did just want to draw out a little bit was a couple of people mentioned the liaison, integrating our work with other people's work, or at least staying in touch with what other people are doing. And, various groups were mentioned, IAASB, IAASB, IFAC. We have shared the research results with IAASB staff. We have yet to have a more formal conversation with them, but we've started that process already, and we actually share members on each other's advisory, working groups on technology. The other one I do want to mention is Lisa Padmore, who's the chair of the IFAC board technology advisory group. She's been a good participant at many of our roundtables and whiteboarding sessions. And has been able to offer some really good insights from that broader IFAC perspective, which has certainly helped us prepare us for this, and hopefully will be helpful going forward. That's it, Tom. Thanks.
And I should say that I've spoken to the IAASB about this topic and let them know what we're doing. So I think the connection to the relevant regulatory bodies, obviously the PIOB is involved, is witnessing this, and I speak to the monitoring group members about our work on this, but it's a really important point, is to stay connected within the ecosystem. Okay, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. What I want us to do, we're going to have a very short conversation, so I may not have everyone called upon. I may take like 4 or 5 people in the next round. And really, we want to be succinct. The quicker we go through, the more we could take. But the way we're going to haven't been disruptive by how much contributions we have. We're going to be flexible too, exactly what we need to be, and sort of think about, with this in mind, are there any changes in our current work plan, our strategy, or the way we work that you would think, and it could be lightning round, like 1-2 points on this, and be very quick. And the more succinct we are, the more people we get in. But we're going to have to close that session off by 9:30. I think a half an hour will be enough time for the conforming amendment. So let's regroup at 9:10 my time. 9 minutes now. I'll see you shortly.
Hey, Lynn, how are you doing?
How are things in South Africa? You're on mute. You need to unmute.
I've just been reminded that we're live streaming on YouTube. Okay, I'll message you instead, Lynn.
Okay.
Good night, Lynn. Lynn, you're not on mute now.
No, I'm definitely not on mute.
Okay, we'll start in 1 more minute. Okay, can we all join back? So we're going to spend the next 15, 20 minutes on sort of a revised question 3, which is a combination of questions 3 and 4. But at the highest level is what, based upon what we've said today, is when you think about our work plan, strategy, a way we operate any differently. We got a little bit on the last part, and we've touched on some of these things. So really, if there are 2 or 3 of the most important things that we could do from a work plan or strategy perspective, what would you think they are? And as I said, we want to get as many people in as possible. So we'll ask for call hands. Brett, you have anything else you want to add to this revised question 3?
I don't think I need to say anything else much on question 3, other than just to mention that, we have been talking with Fernando about the future of the technology working group, what role they can play, whether there's more guidance that needs to be done. So, we will be listening very closely to those observations. And Fernando, of course, if you want to come in, feel free. Just on the last section on strategic considerations, I will just flag some of the points that have been made already are also relevant here. You'll see one of the ideas was a skills matrix for IAASB staff, possible secondees, upskilling of staff, and for that matter, education sessions for board members, which, has been brought up already. So I think that's probably all I need to say here, Tom, just to sensitize people to the thoughts we've already had.
Great. Okay. Jim Dowkin, welcome.
Thanks, Tom. And one general comment that I guess it parlays into question 3 is an observation we had regarding technology within the CAG. And that was specifically a lot of these advanced technologies also involve independence issues. Independence issues with a auditor's client and using their systems or hosting their systems. So I just would encourage, as this working group or prioritization is set up, that someone consider to what extent do we need to involve IAASB in some of these discussions. Thanks.
There we go. Thank you. Kaiwe?
Thanks, Tom. My response to this 2 questions is that, firstly, I believe the most important thing the IAASB can do is to not fill up the work plan completely, so that if disruptive technologies occur, the IAASB is capable of moving resources rapidly to address such developments. And from a strategic point of view, in my view, the main strategic consideration may be to consider whether, given rapid change, the standard should be more principle-based and less prescriptive in detail, because detail prescription leads to shorter half-lives for standards. The main change for operation may be that the IAASB will need to find better ways of integrating external expertise into its processes. Tom, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Kai. Eric.
Thanks, Tom. I think my suggestion would be that we should use the inventory or framework to develop something that can be kept up to date in terms of what the implications might be for the various projects across the whole agenda, rather than waiting for individual task forces to identify technology issues. Spend time with the advisory group identifying where the implications might be for standards projects of the various technologies as they're evolving. And as people provide input to the board, keep track of those, so that there's kind of a constant available listing of the technologies that may have implications on what we do. And in that respect, I think somebody mentioned about the TWG. I mean, I think it needs to be on that list and kind of where they fit into the whole picture of the technologies that we're talking about across the various projects. So the only other thing I would say, there may be a need to consider how we, as a standards project, might take several number of years to come to fruition, and technology might be evolving during that period. Is how do we keep that momentum going through a standards project? Do we have to do things a bit faster to allow technology to be built into the standards project as it evolves over the course of its life? Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Sue.
Thanks. A couple of things on perhaps how we work. I think one of the things we need to be careful of is that we don't try and write standards in a way that cover off absolutely everything, because there are technologies and developments that we can't foresee at the moment that may change how we think of things. And I'm thinking there, we already have a problem around things like data analytics, and they don't meet the definition of substantive analytical procedures, and what are they? So I think just being maybe a bit more high level thinking about, rather than trying to box and categorize everything off. And then in terms of other things for the work program, or thinking about that, I think Roger mentioned other forms of assurance, and I've got in mind there something like blockchain, because if we have blockchain technology, to what extent does everybody have to audit something, versus is there a form of assurance that can be used more widely? Thank you.
I'm coming back. I had to find me in the screen and then unmute me. Okay, Isabel.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you. So as many have said, part of these innovations are already used in some audits. So of course we can think of a technology group to work on them, but I believe that we could also integrate part of this innovation inside the revision of our audit evidence ISA 500 project. So we could think of that, but we have to keep also in mind the scalability. Not all these techniques will be used immediately by all the auditors on all kinds of audit. So our standards have to remain principle-based. And even if we refer to that kind of techniques, we have to allow some of the practitioners to be able to use more traditional form of audits if it's better fit to the purpose of the entities they are auditing. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger?
Thanks, Tom. Look, my suggestion is I think with disruptive technologies, it gives us a chance to look at how we do processes. We tend to work on an incremental basis and work with the incremental standards, changing what is there at the moment. I think this is a chance to step back and say, have we got the basis right, especially around the 500 series of standards, and rather than trying to work on incremental, if we're working with a blank sheet of paper, what would we look like in this new environment? So I think that you need some disruption sometimes just to see whether you're working from the correct base.
Thank you. Lynn?
Just a quick thought, making sure that we have a stream for our internal processes of using these kind of technologies to streamline and improve the way we do things. For example, how can we analyse the consultation letters quicker, better, easier? What other technologies are there? That's my idea. Thanks.
Thanks. And Diane?
Yeah, maybe just being a little bit more specific in the question on how would we change any current work streams or projects. I think definitely my opinion would be the fraud working group, thinking about the role of technology in that. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes back in response to the discussion paper, but it would seem like that would be a natural fit to incorporate that into that working group in a more explicit manner.
Okay, great. Any other hands? Okay, I see none. Some really good suggestions about projects that we have on the agenda today that we may have to think extra hard. I see fraud, audit, evidence clearly had big influence by technology. Some thoughts about how we focus our working group, technology working group. Some thoughts about keeping our eyes on tools to help us, some of which we're already adopting related to collaboration efforts and analysis of comment letters as well, but others that we should keep our eyes on. And if you remember, we didn't talk much about those, but at the original slide, there was a whole box of tools that we are considering, and also obviously Office 365 has a lot of the is incorporate a lot of those tools as well now. And so really good suggestions. I think we should just take those back. One thing, as you know, we actually have to think about our work plan going forward too. So this will be, I think we'll when we go consult, this may be a topic that we add to that consultation and thinking about the impact of that. The work plan ends technically the period is at the end of the year. We could talk about why we did a 2-year work plan when we have a 4-year strategy, but it is what it is, and we'll consult on it. But this seems to be a logical area for consultation as well. Brett, Yvonne, Gio, anything other concluding points you want to raise before we close?
Just from me, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of Yvonne as well, but feel free to come in. Just wanted to express my thanks. These sessions are, an enormous amount of work to get them ready, and I really appreciate the open-mindedness with which everyone has approached this. So I really thank everyone for that effort.
And I just wanted to thank Brett and Yvonne and the founders team, who in my life now, my relationship with them is 6 years old now, or 5 years old. I can't remember. They've been wonderful partners, but all of you for all the preparation going into this. This is definitely a different type of session that we normally have at the board. It exceeded my expectations. So thank you to all the board members for your participation, but it reinforces the need to have these discussions more regularly and help us, I think when we talked about our strategy, there's a desire to take a more strategic lens to public interest issues. There's no more strategic question than the impact of technology and how it affects the world of audit and assurance and our role in that. So I'm really pleased with this, and I'm just guessing that we'll have another one of these open sessions at the board this calendar year, at least once. So thank you all for this session, and thank you to, again, the founders team. Unless you want to stay for the conforming amendments, which is probably rather relevant to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Cool. Thanks all. Not sure we'd add much to the next agenda point.
Indeed. No, most welcome. It's been a real pleasure working with you and the team, and great to support a robust and thoughtful conversation today. It's just been great to hear. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're going to turn to our second topic of the day, agenda item 2, conforming amendments to other IAASB standards arising from the QM standards. As I said earlier, this is a continuation of our previous discussion that we had in November. One of the things, it was lots of things happening right now. We didn't want to rush the amendments through. And we thought, since we got a few last minute ones, that we should just give it the time to get the drafting right, and to assess whether they were really major substantive issues or not, which for the most part were not, but they obviously were improvements. I wrote that in my note to you last week. So the goal is, remember, we're putting this out for exposure draft. We're not approving this for final, is whether we could get your approval on the recently circulated draft of the conforming amendments. And I'll turn over to Brett to explain where we stand, and hopefully we'll get your support and are able to vote this out for consultation.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone for the session that we're about to have. I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself, but I do want to really appreciate all the thoughtful comments we got back on the papers back in November. So since then, we've taken away those comments. We took the time to go through them in quite a bit of detail and make what we felt were the appropriate changes in light of those comments. So those are what are in the agenda papers that we posted last week. Since then, we have had a couple of gremlins that people have pointed out to us. So I'm just going to explain what those are at a pretty high level. I'm not proposing to go through them. They are, in general, quite minor. There's one or two points that I will pause on for just a moment, but generally I'm going to cover them off pretty quickly. So for example, there was areas where we said we still had the words quality control in there. I don't know how many times I've done Control F and searched through this document, but somehow or another they keep appearing. So we still had a couple of those. We had some minor editorials just where we'd messed up cross-referencing, paragraph numbering, things like that. They were really not substantive points at all, so I won't go through those in any detail. Couple of places where we had some inconsistencies between the summary of changes and the proposed changes that we're actually showing in the proposed exposure draft. We've just made sure that we've got those right in the document now. So what was in the summary of changes was correct. And just in one or two places, we'd did it incorrectly in the actual proposed exposure draft. And we did have a spot where somehow or another some text we'd marked as deleted actually wasn't showing up as deleted, and that was causing a little bit of concerns for some people. So the one thing that I do want to just pause on a little bit is ISAE 3000 paragraph 33 has a subparagraph A, and at the end of that subparagraph we had some wording, and just apologies, I've just got to switch screens. We had some wording at the end of subparagraph A that said, I'll just read out the whole paragraph for you. You don't need to turn to it necessarily. I think it's a fairly straightforward point, but we said, this includes responsibility for being satisfied that the firm's policies or procedures for the acceptance of continuance of client relationships and assurance engagements have been appropriately performed. And a couple of people pointed out that have been performed in relation to a procedure is a little bit of an odd turn of phrase. And it's not one we've used before. So instead, we propose to change that one to have been followed, which is what we've used in other places. Now, we did also get a question as to whether we should go a little bit further and bring in some more material from ISO 220. My feeling is I would prefer not to do that because it's not explicitly drawn out in this paragraph. I will point out to people as well that, so consistent with the project proposal, we weren't trying to bring in any more than what was already there. We were trying to align what we already had. So there's a point of departure there with our project proposal. I think that was probably everything I need to mention just now. The only other thing that I will mention is we do need to talk about the effective date again. We can do that after we've held a vote. We've just had a very interesting observation made by Eric Turner that I just want to bring to the board's attention and suggest a slight modification to what we discussed back in November. You might remember back in November, we agreed on an effective date. We're just suggesting that we might want to, in the explanatory memorandum, propose a slightly different version of that and then ask for comments on that. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. Do we have any comments on what Brett's proposed or anything that needs to be raised before we go to vote on the exposure draft? Okay. The effective date is a separate topic, right? So let's deal with the exposure draft. And is everyone aware that what we're trying to approve is the document subject to the slight amendments that Brett suggested for publication as an exposure draft? Okay, everyone's nodding their head. So I'm going to ask this: does the IAASB approve the draft exposure draft? It's agenda item 2A of the proposed conforming and consequential amendments to the IAASB's other standards arising from the QM standards for issuance for public comment. By show of hands, I'll ask if you approve. Okay, we have 17 hands up, plus now mine is 18. So you got unanimous approval. So hands down on that. Okay, Brett, can you remind people what we're going to approve in terms of the effective date?
Absolutely. First of all, just thanks for that vote. It's always very pleasing, and I never take them for granted. So in terms of the effective date, the challenge that we've had is the standards that we've got in the, in particularly in volume 2. When we did the changes for ISQM2, we actually wrote the effective date paragraph for ISQM2 to deal slightly differently with them, depending on how they were worded at the moment. So we deal slightly differently with the review standards than we do with the assurance standards, because they're written in a slightly different way. So it's essentially to do with whether we have what we agreed in November, which was we just have the conforming amendments go into effect at a point in time. So we agreed in December, 15th of December, 2022, which is what we did for QM1. QM2, however, had a longer version of the same idea. It's still the same date. It just affects the way that we word it slightly differently. And the answer to what we would put in the explanatory memorandum is we would say something like, the IAASB intends that these conforming amendments be effective for reviews of financial statements for periods beginning on or after December 15, 2022, and other assurance and related service engagements beginning on or after December 2022. Now, I don't think this actually has any practical effect. It's not going to change how we do the handbook. It's not going to change anything to do with that, but it is just a small recognition that the way that we wrote ISQM2 did allow for the possibility that we needed to be a little bit more subtle about how we dealt with those other standards.
In fact, it's really to conform the conforming amendments more tightly to the standards. It actually is more precise. Okay. Any questions about Brett's articulation of the proposed effective date? Okay. By show of hands, who supports that proposed effective date? Okay, we're unanimous there too. Okay, 18 votes. Okay, hands down. Now, Brad, I think the final thing is the exposure period, right?
Correct, except we've already taken a vote on that back in December. So we said 90 days, but just to confirm with everyone that the plan will be that this goes out as quickly as we can for a 90-day exposure period.
Okay. Anyone objects to that? I won't need to take another vote. Okay, because we've already voted on it. Okay, so congratulations. You have approval of the exposure draft, approval of the proposed effective date, and the 90-day comment period out there. I don't know if Karen or Jim have anything that they want to say about this topic.
Nothing from me. I'm very glad that you're getting the exposure draft out. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're in good shape on that topic, and I'm now sorry that I sped things up on the the final. It's always the case on this final discussion. So why don't Brett, were you going to come in and discuss what we're going to do on the explanatory memorandum?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So just with the explanatory memorandum, as per normal practice, we have got a draft prepared. I just need to spend a little bit more time with it, and then we'll get it out in accordance with our internal schedules to make sure we're not overloading you too much. So you will expect to see that in your inboxes soon. It's not very long. I will be, this is not a terribly complicated exercise, and so we try not to turn it into one by writing a 15-page explanatory memorandum. So it shouldn't be a hard read for you, but I did just want to alert you to the fact that that was coming. It will be, for those of you who have been around for a few years, it will be very similar to the one we did for the IAASB conforming amendments last year. The year before it might have actually been. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. So you made such great work, board, of the materials for this meeting. I know you're anxious to see what's happening in the future. So with that, my favorite part, I get the popcorn out. Lily's going to give us some coming attractions.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I'm almost tempted to say, let's go back to the technology discussion, because I think the board had so much good information to share. So maybe just a little bit of a preview. Firstly, I just want to thank all the board members that responded to the IAASB explanatory memorandum for the PI project. We've yesterday worked on going through all the comments we've received. Josephine, thank you very much for your input on that as well. So I think Jeff and Mike and the IAASB team is on track to get the explanatory memorandum and the ED published by the end of this week, or if not by very latest early next week. And what we've decided to do, as we discussed in the November call as well, is when the ethics board releases the ED with their normal news alert, we will also do our own news alert to alert our stakeholders to that ED, and that it is very important that our stakeholders also respond as part of the IAASB's information gathering. This was our first call for the year. The next call that comes up will be a back-to-back call, and that will be on February 10 and 11. You would have also seen that we've split that call into one of the days will be a morning session, the other one will be an evening session using New York time as the sort of point of departure. And for that meeting, we will have 3 topics that will come to the board. The one probably a little bit overdue is we're going to take you a little bit on the journey of what we've been doing on the auditor reporting post-implementation review. There's been a lot of information gathering done. We've got the survey results, we've analyzed the survey results, and we will share some of the feedback from that and ask the board's view in terms of what the audit reporting implementation working group needs to think about as it carries this forward to hopefully come to the board with recommendations in Q4. The other 2 topics for the February 10 and 11 discussion will be our framework for activities. You will remember that's also one of the topics that have been a little bit delayed because of the effects of COVID-19 last year and the adjustments we had to make to the work plan. But we are now in a position, we had a very good discussion with the planning committee last week on our framework for activities. We've brought all the components together, and I'm very excited that it's come together very nicely in a cohesive framework for how we decide what we do, when we do it, how we do it. And I think is something that will give us a lot of control over what we do and the sequence in which we make decisions for purposes of our work plan. So we will, that's not an authoritative document. Remember, it's more an internal document. It's off the back of our strategy and work plan, but still we would obviously want to see if the board agrees with what we've put forward in the framework. And then closely aligned to that, we will also come to the board with a proposal and with a proposed approach on how we're going to do the consultation on our 2022-2023 work plan. So we will come with an approach, and if the board agrees with that, we will start rolling that out. Part of that will be to do it in a format of a survey, which we want to launch around April this year. We will get the feedback back, and then we will have a touch point with the board in September, and then hopefully approve the 2022-2023 work plan out at our December meeting, after which it can then go to the PIOB for approval of due process. So that's really the 3 topics we're going to have for February 10 and 11. We are confident that we will be able to post at the end of this week. So as part of the posting email that goes to the board, we will just reconfirm the times again and give you a little bit of an indication of how the time slots will work for the 3 topics. And then I hope you all received my email that I sent out last week on the agenda for March. So again, you know, we are very conscious of the fact that what the virtual environment has really meant is that you can't really, as board members now, just sort of carve out your board week as a board week. So what happens now is you have a board week, but you also have your day jobs, and that makes it extremely difficult to just keep all the balls in the air. So what we've decided, what we've managed again, is to make sure that we deal with everything in a single week. We've spread the sessions, again, share the pain a little bit in terms of time zones and giving preference to the task force chairs that are presenting. And you would have seen that the topics for us is audit evidence, LCE, ISA 600, and then very importantly is we also want to approve our EER guidance. So that one will have a session, and then we'll also provide for a turn and come back for approval. So a lot to look forward to still in Q1, and we'll keep you up to date in terms of electronic communications. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Billy. Any questions on what Billy highlighted?
Sorry, Tom, I just remembered one thing I want to highlight, because I was almost caught off guard with this, and I did actually put it in the footnote to the agenda, is that our meeting starts on March 15. US goes to daylight saving time on March 14. So it's just the day before we have our meeting. So just make sure that the time doesn't catch you out.
It's a good point. Thank you for that. Okay. This was a really great way to start off the year in board session. So thank you all for your participation. I know everyone was extremely well prepared for the discussion, so I appreciate that, but I also wanted to thank your TAs for their support in this process, because I know that goes a long way to helping you to be prepared as well. And of course, to the staff team, great job. This was, Billy and I were joking, it was a little bit of the Brett show today. So Brett, your time was well placed, where you didn't waste it. And Yvonne, of course, for being your support for the technology side too. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. I will be having conversations over the coming weeks, but thank you, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.